Hello friends, welcome to African Tales Retold. Please subscribe to this channel and share the stories to others. By the way, to enable subtitles or captions, look for the CC icon on the video player. It will be located in the top right corner where subtitles are available. Now let's dive into the story. In the heart of Zango's bustling market, where the air is thick with the scent of fried plantains and the lively voices of traders, a lone woman moved like a shadow, her eyes darting from one stall to the next. Her name was Sulima, and she was no ordinary trader. She was a poor woman, barely surviving, selling what seemed to be simple, everyday items: buckets, bowls, old clothes, and shoes, offered in exchange for something far stranger: people's old clothes and their underwear. A peculiar request, but she had her reasons. "Ah, auntie, just a small item," she'd coo, flashing her tired but eager smile. And most people, thinking little of it, would hand her their worn-out clothes, even their underwear, as part of the trade. After all, what harm could there be in giving away something destined for the trash? But the whispers of Zango's elders told a different story, one that warned against trading the most intimate of belongings. One night, after a long day of collecting her strange trades, Sulima sat alone in her dark, cramped room, counting the coins she'd earned. A chill crept into her bones. She felt the hairs on her neck stand, as if unseen eyes were watching her from every corner of the room. Shaking off her fear, she lay down to sleep. But sleep did not come easily. That night, she dreamed of shadowy figures, the silent ones, clad in black, beckoning her into a narrow alley lined with flickering candles. Their voices were low, like a distant chant, and in her dream, Sulima's hands clutched bundles of old, worn clothing. The silent ones gathered around her, nodding in approval, whispering in unison, "The power lies in what they discard." Sulima awoke with a start, her heart racing. Just as she sat up, a faint knock sounded at her door. She hesitated, fear clawing up her throat as she opened it. In the dim hallway, a figure stood, cloaked in shadows, holding a small sack. They handed it to her with no words, just a knowing look. Sulima's hands trembled as she took the bag and opened it. Inside lay a single, worn, embroidered scarf, a belonging she recognized. It was the scarf of a young woman from the market, someone who had traded with her just days ago. And just as Sulima's fingers touched it, a voice whispered in her ear, "She doesn't know, but you do." The room spun, her vision darkening, and a cold sweat broke out across her skin. What had she become part of? And how could she possibly get out? The morning sun rose over the city of Zango, casting a warm glow on the crowded streets. Zango was known for its bustling marketplace, where vendors and traders shouted out their wares, bargaining with customers over the best prices for everything from fresh vegetables to handmade jewelry. Among these vendors was Sulima, a woman with rough hands and a weary gaze, who sat beside a stack of shiny buckets, colorful plastic bowls, and other practical items that gleamed in the morning light. "Come, Ani, come and see. Trade me those old things cluttering your home for something new," she called out to passers-by with a warm smile that masked her desperation. Sulima's voice was sweet, inviting, and it attracted many customers who didn't mind parting with things they no longer needed. She knew most of the people here. Many were struggling, like her, just trying to get by. But unlike most vendors, Sulima's trade had an odd twist. She accepted almost any worn-out items: clothes, shoes, broken household objects, but what she prized most was people's underwear. She never explained why, only hinted that it was just part of the trade. Some of the customers, like Fatu, a mother of 3, raised an eyebrow at her request. "Sulima, why do you want such old, personal things? Surely they're of no value to anyone?" "Oh, Auntie Fatu, they're for a project," Sulima said, flashing her best smile and waving it off with a little laugh. "There's an artist from another town who uses old fabrics for art. She pays me a little for each piece. You know how it is," she added, hoping to sound casual. Fatu shrugged, finding Sulima's explanation harmless enough, and handed over an old blouse and a few pairs of her husband's socks in exchange for a small plastic bucket. Sulima tucked the items carefully into her large woven bag, muttering her thanks. But inside, she felt a strange thrill. a mixture of relief and fear that no one suspected her true motives. As the day wore on, Salima's bag grew heavy with clothes, shoes, and yes, several pairs of underwear that her customers had willingly handed over. She barely noticed the weight, though, because her mind was preoccupied with what came next. She had her own little ritual to perform, something she'd been taught by the mysterious group that had approached her months ago, offering her a way out of her poverty. The silent ones had been strange, appearing out of nowhere one night while she walked home. They were hooded figures, moving without a sound, their faces obscured in shadow. One of them, a tall man with a deep voice, had told her, "Bring us their discards, their most personal things. We will reward you beyond your wildest dreams." Salima had been skeptical, even frightened. But when they showed her a pouch full of gold coins, her fear had wavered. The lure of riches was too strong, and she'd found herself agreeing. It seemed like an easy job, collecting things people didn't want and trading them for something shiny. She didn't ask too many questions. She didn't want to know what they did with the items. All she cared about was that they paid her, and that she could finally escape the poverty that had plagued her family for generations. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Salima packed up her stall, shouldering her heavy bag. She walked through the dimly lit streets of Zango, weaving through alleys until she reached the edge of the marketplace. She felt a familiar sense of foreboding as she entered a secluded alley and stopped before a crumbling wall with faint symbols carved into the stones. This was the meeting spot, where she would deliver the items she'd collected. The shadows grew thicker as she waited. She hugged her bag close, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Moments later, a figure emerged from the darkness, the tall, hooded man who led the silent ones. Without a word, he reached out his gloved hand, palm up. Salima emptied her bag, watching him inspect each item with a strange reverence. She felt a shiver when he lingered on a delicate lace scarf and a pair of pale blue panties she'd received earlier that day. He traced the fabric with his finger, and a thin smile spread across his face, though his eyes remained hidden in shadow. What do you do with them?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man looked up, his face still obscured but his grin unmistakable. "These things carry a piece of their owners' souls. With each item you bring, our power grows." Salima's stomach twisted. She hadn't fully understood what that meant, but she didn't want to know. All that mattered was that he handed her a small sack, filled with coins, as promised. Her hands trembled as she took it, feeling the weight of the gold. She told herself it was worth it. She would be rich. She would be free. But as she turned to leave, the man's voice stopped her cold. "Remember, Salima, this is only the beginning." The next day, Salima was back at the market, and to any casual observer, she looked like any other vendor. But her thoughts were far from ordinary as she replayed the man's chilling words in her mind. As she was arranging her buckets and bowls, a young woman named Rexha, a beautiful seamstress from the city, approached. Rexha was well liked by everyone, known for her kindness and generosity. Salima noticed the bright red scarf Rexha wore and the way her friends laughed with her. A pang of jealousy flared in her heart, but she pushed it aside. "Salima," Rexha called, her voice bright. "I heard you're trading for old things. I have a few scarves and blouses that I don't use anymore. I'd like one of those bowls if that's all right." Salima's heart raced. She could already feel the man's voice echoing in her mind, urging her to collect more items from people like Rexha. But she forced a calm smile and nodded, taking the offered items and handing Rexha the bowl. "Thank you, Salima. This will be perfect for my kitchen," Rexha said with a warm smile before waving goodbye. As Rexha walked away, Salima felt a wave of unease wash over her. The night before, the Silent One had mentioned something about people's souls, and now, here she was, taking pieces of other people's lives in exchange for a few shiny trinkets. She shook her head, trying to silence the guilt that was clawing its way into her mind. But the feeling lingered, heavy and cold. Just as she was closing up for the day, a letter arrived, delivered by a child who ran off before she could ask any questions. Salima unfolded the paper, her eyes widening as she read the carefully written message. "Meet us tonight. The time has come for you to take the next step. A chill ran down her spine as she realized she was in deeper than she'd ever imagined. But there was no turning back now. She was bound to them, and each night, it seemed her choices led her further into the shadows. Night had settled over Zango, casting shadows that seemed deeper than usual, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Salima walked through the empty streets toward the meeting place described in the letter. Her footsteps echoed off the narrow stone walls, and each step seemed to pull her deeper into a dark abyss from which she felt she might never return. As she turned the corner into a secluded alley, she spotted them, the silent ones. For shadowy figures stood in a line, their faces hidden by hoods, their hands folded before them in perfect stillness. The leader, the tall man who had first approached her months ago, stepped forward. "Welcome, Salima," he said in a low, almost soothing voice. "You've done well for us so far. Tonight, we ask you to make a choice, one that will determine how far you're willing to go for what you desire." Salima felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She had thought that her job was simple: collect the items, make the trades, receive her payment. But something in the man's tone told her that her journey was far from over. The tall man reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. He opened it, revealing a single pair of delicate, lace-trimmed panties resting inside. Salima stared at the box, confusion twisting her features. What did this mean? "This item," the man explained, "belongs to a woman of wealth and influence in Zango. She is happy, successful, beloved. Her happiness is powerful, and when transferred, her energy can be redirected." Salima felt a shiver run down her spine. She hadn't fully understood the Silent One's intentions before, but now, a terrible understanding began to dawn on her. The man continued, "Your task, Salima, is to acquire similar items from those who hold power in their lives. We need items from people who are joyful, secure, or influential. The more happiness they hold, the stronger the energy we can harvest." Salima's heart pounded. Up until now, she had been taking things from anyone who offered, a mix of regular people who had little to lose. But now they wanted her to target the most fortunate, the people she had always envied. It felt wrong, but at the same time, she could almost taste the promise of wealth that had once seemed so out of reach. "Why them?" Salima asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why take from those who have done nothing wrong?" The man's lips curled into a faint smile, though it held no warmth. "Because their happiness is powerful, and with that power, we can reshape lives, or end them." A knot formed in Salima's stomach, but the words echoed in her mind. Reshape lives. Wasn't that what she wanted? To reshape her own life, to escape her desperation? If these items could give her the wealth she'd always dreamed of, wasn't that worth any sacrifice? "Are you prepared to continue?" the man asked, watching her carefully. Salima looked down at the sack of coins he'd handed her the night before. It was more money than she'd ever had, but she knew it was nothing compared to what they were promising her if she continued. After a long pause, she nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and dread churning inside her. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll continue." The Silent Ones exchanged glances, and a strange sense of approval filled the air, as if they'd been waiting for her to say those words all along. The tall man reached into his cloak once more, pulling out a small, rolled-up parchment. "This list contains the names of people we want you to target," he said, handing her the parchment. "Each of them is a person of influence. Begin with these, and report back to us at the next full moon." Salima unrolled the parchment, her eyes scanning the names written in delicate script. The names felt familiar, even sacred. People she'd seen in the market, on the streets, people who held the respect of the city. She felt a pang of guilt, but she told herself it was only temporary. Soon, she would have everything she ever wanted, and no one would have to know. As she tucked the list into her pocket, the tall man spoke again, his voice a low whisper that sent chills down her spine. "Remember, Salima, we chose you because you have a darkness in you, one that can only be tamed by the rewards we offer. But if you fail us, the consequences will be severe." Salima nodded, her mouth dry, knowing there was no turning back now. She had accepted their offer, their rewards, and their power. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it. As she turned to leave, she glanced over her shoulder, but the silent ones were already gone, vanished into the night as if they had never been there at all. Over the next week, Salima's life changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. At first, things seemed to improve. She traded more frequently at the market, carefully choosing her customers according to the list. She found herself speaking more convincingly, her words carrying a strange power that made people listen. Her confidence grew, and so did her wealth. She began dressing in finer clothes, eating better meals, and even moving into a small but comfortable apartment on the edge of the city. But along with her success came a creeping darkness that seemed to shadow her every move. She began noticing odd things in Zango. People she traded with started complaining of mysterious ailments. Fadila, an elderly woman known for her cheerful laughter, was suddenly bedridden with weakness she couldn't explain. Idris, a popular young merchant, spoke of feeling haunted by strange dreams. Word spread through the city that something sinister was in the air. People whispered that a curse had fallen on Zango, though no one knew where it had come from. Salima heard these whispers and felt a chill settle over her. She tried to ignore them, but a deep, nagging guilt began to claw at her. One evening, as she was closing up her stall, a young woman approached her, looking troubled. It was Rakia, the same woman who had traded with her for a bowl a few days before. "Salima," Rakia said, her voice soft but intense, "I've been feeling strange since our last trade. I can't shake this feeling of emptiness. It's like something important has been taken from me." Salima's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to laugh lightly. "Oh, Rakia, it's probably just the stress. Life has a way of wearing us down, doesn't it?" Rakia didn't seem convinced, but she nodded and walked away, her gaze still filled with unease. Salima watched her go, feeling a wave of guilt wash over her. For a moment, she considered leaving the silent ones, abandoning this dark path she had chosen. But then she thought of the money, the power she had gained, and the promise of even greater wealth if she continued. "It's too late to turn back now," she told herself, though the words felt hollow. That night, Salima fell into a restless sleep, haunted by strange visions. She dreamed of Zango's market, but it was empty and eerily silent. A thick fog hung over the stalls, and she could hear whispers, soft, chilling voices that seemed to call her name. In her dream, she walked through the empty market, drawn toward the sound of the whispers. She turned a corner and found herself face to face with the silent ones, their dark figures looming over her. "You have done well, Salima," the tall man said, his voice echoing in her mind. "But remember, the price of power is eternal loyalty." Salima tried to back away, but she found herself rooted to the spot, unable to move. The silent ones surrounded her, their faces hidden, their whispers growing louder and more sinister. She felt their cold hands pressing down on her shoulders, pulling her deeper into the darkness. She awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. The dream felt too real, as though the silent ones had been in the room with her, watching her every move. Salima sat up, clutching her blanket, a sick feeling churning in her stomach. She knew she was in too deep, that she was no longer just a simple street vendor. She was part of something dark and dangerous, something that was slowly consuming her from the inside out. But as she looked around her small, richly furnished room, she reminded herself of the wealth she had gained, the life she was building for herself. She told herself that it was worth it, that the darkness was a small price to pay. Yet, deep down, a voice whispered that the silent ones had claimed more than just her loyalty. They had taken her soul. As Salima becomes more aware of the darkness surrounding her choices, her dreams reveal the sinister grip the silent ones have on her, showing that her loyalty to them has deeper consequences than she imagined. Each night, her connection to the silent ones grows stronger, and the cost of her desires begins to weigh heavily on her. Days passed, and the city of Zango was gripped by a strange, unsettling atmosphere. People spoke of feeling drained, haunted by feelings they couldn't explain, and it seemed as if the vibrant energy that once defined the bustling city was slowly fading away. Salima could feel it too. The way life around her seemed dimmer, quieter. as if a heavy cloud hung over everyone's spirit. Yet, she continued her work. Each night, she went to the market, gathering clothes and especially underwear from those on the silent ones list. She could feel her guilt growing heavier with each item she collected, especially as she witnessed the toll it was taking on people around her. But every time she thought about stopping, she would remember the power and wealth she was finally experiencing. Her small apartment was now filled with luxuries she'd only dreamed of before. Silk curtains, golden lamps, and vibrant rugs. She dined on fine meals instead of simple porridge, wore rich fabrics instead of coarse cloth, and was beginning to enjoy the respect and envy of those around her. One evening, as she was packing up her stall, she noticed a new figure waiting for her in the shadows. It was one of the silent ones, though not the tall man she usually dealt with. This one was shorter, with a voice like sandpaper rubbing over stone. "We have seen your progress, Salima," he said without preamble, his voice chilling. "The silent ones are pleased, but they require more from you. The next items on the list are from those who hold even greater energy. Their connection to happiness and influence is strong." Salima's hands trembled slightly as she took the list. She glanced down at the names written there, feeling her stomach twist as she recognized each one. These were not just influential people. They were city leaders, respected elders, even a few community healers who people turn to in times of trouble. What will happen to them?" she dared to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The silent one tilted his head slightly, as if puzzled by her question. "Their essence will fuel the purpose we serve. You need not worry about their fate, only about your task." Salima hesitated, feeling the weight of her choices bearing down on her. She remembered how her family had struggled, how she had spent years scraping by. This was her chance to finally rise above it all. But at what cost? "Do not question Salima," the figure said sharply, his tone dropping to a cold whisper. "You have chosen this path, and we are watching you closely. Do not falter, or the consequences will be yours to bear." Salima swallowed hard, nodding as she accepted the list. She forced herself to bury her guilt and focus on the rewards, telling herself that this was the price of success, the price she had agreed to pay. The following days were difficult for Salima. Each time she approached one of the people on her list, her heart raced with anxiety, and her conscience screamed at her to stop. She watched these influential people, the merchants, the leaders, the healers, as they went about their daily lives, greeting friends, helping neighbors, bringing life and joy to Zango. One evening, she traded with an elder named Baba Sul, who was well respected throughout the city for his wisdom and kindness. As he handed over an old cloak and a pair of woolen socks, he looked at her with a strange sadness. "Salima, my dear, you look troubled," he said softly. "Is something weighing on your heart?" Salima forced a smile, trying to dismiss his concern. "Oh, Baba Sul, it's just life. Sometimes it feels heavy, you know?" The old man nodded thoughtfully, his eyes gentle but penetrating. "Remember, my child, no wealth or success is worth losing your peace. If you feel burdened, it's often a sign that something is not right." His words struck her deeply, but she forced herself to brush them off. She was in too deep, bound by a promise that she couldn't break. She had no choice but to continue. As the full moon approached, Salima felt a growing sense of dread. The city's atmosphere had become even darker, with whispers of illness and strange dreams spreading among the people. But her own life was thriving. She had moved to a larger home, wearing beautiful clothes and eating fine meals every day. Yet, her heart was never at peace, haunted by Baba Sul's words and the hollow looks on the faces of those she traded with. On the night of the full moon, she returned to the secluded alley with her latest collection of items. The silent ones awaited her, their figures barely visible in the moonlight. The tall leader stepped forward, examining her offerings carefully. "You have done well, Salima," he said, his voice a chilling mix of satisfaction and menace. "With each item you bring, our power strengthens." Salima handed over the last item reluctantly, a scarf belonging to a well-loved teacher in the city. As the silent one took it from her, she felt a stab of guilt, knowing how this would affect another innocent person. Is there any other way?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Can I not help you in some way that doesn't Harm others? The silent one's face remained in shadow, but she could feel his gaze bore into her, cold and unyielding. Power requires sacrifice, Salima. To take without giving is to deny the nature of the world. You wanted wealth and freedom, and now you must pay the price. Salima's heart sank as she realized there would be no mercy, no other way. She was trapped in a pact that demanded more of her with each passing day. She wanted to turn back, to reclaim the simple life she once knew, but she was bound by her own greed and desperation. Your loyalty will be rewarded, Salima, the silent one continued. In time, you will understand the true purpose of your work. Before she could ask what he meant, the silent ones disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone with her fears and regrets. Days turned into weeks, and the effects of Salima's actions became impossible to ignore. People in the city were falling ill, complaining of strange visions and feelings of emptiness. Even the vibrant marketplace felt subdued, the colors and sounds dimmer, the energy weaker. Whispers spread that Zango was cursed, that an unknown evil was draining the life from the city. Salima tried to ignore it, but the guilt gnawed at her, refusing to be silenced. She felt haunted by the faces of those she traded with, their expressions dull and hollow, their laughter faded. One afternoon, Rexha, the seamstress who had once traded with her, approached her stall again. But this time, her face was pale, her eyes dull. Salima, she said weakly, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know what's happening to me. I feel empty, like I'm losing myself. Have you? Have you felt anything strange? Salima looked away, unable to meet Rexha's gaze. She wanted to help, to confess everything, but she was terrified of what the silent ones would do if they found out she was having doubts. Maybe it's just the stress, Salima murmured, forcing a smile. Things have been hard for everyone lately. Rexha nodded slowly, but the sadness in her eyes remained. She gave Salima a lingering look before walking away, her shoulders slumped. Salima watched her go, feeling a stab of guilt so intense it made her dizzy. She realized then that she could no longer ignore the damage she was causing. She had wanted power, freedom, wealth, but at what cost? Consumed by guilt, Salima began searching for a way to break free from the silent one's grip. She visited healers, sought advice from elders, even considered fleeing the city. But everywhere she went, she felt the silent ones watching her, their invisible presence a constant reminder of her pact. One night, in a desperate attempt to escape, she tried leaving Zango. She packed her belongings and set out under the cover of darkness, hoping to leave behind the curse she had brought upon her city. But as she approached the city's edge, she found her path blocked. A shadowy figure stood in her way, its face hidden beneath a dark hood. It was one of the silent ones. You cannot run, Salima, the figure said in a voice that seemed to echo inside her head. You are bound to us. There is no escape. Salima's heart sank as she realized the full weight of her choices. She was trapped, bound to a fate she had chosen but now desperately wanted to escape. She was haunted by the knowledge that her actions were draining the life from the city, but there was no way out. She returned to her home, feeling more lost and alone than ever before. She had wealth, power, and influence, but her soul felt empty, hollow, a shell of the person she had once been. As she lay awake that night, she heard a voice in the darkness, whispering words that chilled her to the bone. This is only the beginning, Salima. There is so much more to be done. The days grew darker, and Salima could feel the effects of her pact deepening across the city of Zango. The streets seemed to carry an eerie silence, the usual hum of activity replaced by an unsettling calm. More and more people were growing ill, their vibrant spirits dimming as though life itself were slowly slipping away from them. Salima's guilt gnawed at her constantly. She avoided her own reflection, feeling as though the darkness she was spreading was etched on her very face. But no matter how desperately she wished to turn back, she was bound by a power far beyond her control. One evening, as she was setting up her market stall, a group of people approached her, families of those who had fallen sick. They looked weary, haunted by worry, and their eyes held a pleading desperation. Salima, a woman named Amina, spoke softly, her voice laced with sorrow. You know so many in the city. Do you know what is happening to our loved ones? They are growing weaker, like they're losing something we can't see. Salima felt her heart twist painfully. She opened her mouth to say something, to offer comfort or explanation, but the words caught in her throat. What could she possibly say? That she was the one causing their suffering? That the silent ones were using her trades to drain the life from Zango? Perhaps it's just a strange illness, she murmured, averting her gaze. I'm sure it will pass soon. The group exchanged glances, their expressions filled with doubt. As they walked away, Salima felt the weight of their despair settle over her like a heavy shroud. But even as her conscience screamed for her to stop, she knew there was no escape. The silent ones had bound her, their shadowy figures haunting her every step, ensuring that she would not abandon the path she had chosen. One night, as she lay in bed, Salima was startled awake by a sudden chill that filled the room. She sat up, her heart pounding, and saw the silent ones standing at the foot of her bed, their dark, cloaked figures blending into the shadows. The tall leader stepped forward, his voice as cold as the night air. Salima, we have a new task for you. The next phase of our work requires an even greater sacrifice. Salima's stomach twisted. She had hoped, foolishly, that they would demand less of her, that her torment might ease. But it seemed they were only growing bolder, their demands darker. What do you need? She whispered, dread filling her voice. The leader held out a small vial filled with a thick, dark liquid. This is a potion, crafted with the essence we have gathered. You are to add this to the drinks of 3 chosen people in the city, those who hold the greatest influence. Once they consume it, their spirits will be weakened, allowing us to absorb their essence more fully. Salima felt her breath catch. This was different from simply trading for items. They were asking her to actively harm people, to poison them in a way that went beyond her previous deeds. I can't, she stammered, panic rising in her chest. I can't do that to them. The silent ones exchanged glances, their shadowy faces unreadable. The tall leader stepped closer, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. You have already gone too far to turn back, Salima. Refusal is not an option. Salima's hands trembled as she took the vial, feeling its weight like a stone in her palm. She knew that she had no choice but to obey. The silent ones had a hold on her, a power that she couldn't escape. All she could do was continue down the path they had set for her, hoping that someday, somehow, she might find a way to break free. The next day, Salima carried out her new task, her heart heavy with dread. She visited the marketplace, seeking out the 3 people on the silent ones list, a healer, a councilman, and a merchant. She slipped the vial's contents into their drinks, all the while forcing a smile, hiding her fear and guilt behind a mask of friendly conversation. As the hours passed, she watched in horror as each person began to grow weaker, their faces paling, their steps faltering. They looked at her with confusion and concern, wondering why they felt so drained, why their energy was slipping away so suddenly. Salima wanted to scream, to confess everything, but fear held her silent. She knew that if she spoke out, the silent ones would make her pay. She had seen their power, felt their dark influence, and she knew they were capable of horrors beyond her imagination. As the 3 targets departed, she felt a hollowness settle in her chest, a growing emptiness that seemed to mirror the darkness spreading through Zango. She had once wanted power, wealth, freedom, but now, she was little more than a puppet, a tool of forces she couldn't understand. A week later, whispers of strange illness continued to circulate through Zango. People were now openly talking of a curse, blaming the growing darkness on mysterious forces beyond their control. Some even began to look at Salima with suspicion, noting her sudden wealth, her new clothes, her air of secrecy. One evening, as she was walking through the marketplace, she was stopped by a familiar figure, Baba Sul, the elder who had warned her about the dangers of ambition. Salima, he said softly, his voice laced with a sadness that cut through her like a knife. I have watched you, seen the changes in you, and I have seen the suffering that has followed in your wake. Tell me, my child, what have you done? Salima felt her throat tighten, her heart pounding as she struggled to find words. She wanted to deny everything, to claim innocence. But Baba Sul's gaze was piercing, his wisdom and kindness a painful reminder of all she had betrayed. I don't know what you mean, Baba Sul, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm just trying to make a better life for myself. Baba Sul sighed, his eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to go beyond words. A better life should not come at the cost of others' suffering. Be careful, Sulima. Darkness has a way of consuming those who embrace it, leaving them empty and lost. His words lingered in her mind as she walked away, feeling a mixture of guilt and anger. She wanted to believe that she was doing what she had to, that the price of her success was worth the cost. But deep down, she knew that she was walking a path from which there might be no return. That night, Sulima's sleep was plagued by nightmares. She dreamed of Zango, but it was a desolate, lifeless version of the city she knew. The buildings were crumbling, the streets empty, and a thick, suffocating fog hung in the air. In her dream, she wandered through the empty streets, calling out to the people she had known, but there was no response. She felt a crushing loneliness, an overwhelming sense of despair, as though she were the last person left in a world that had died around her. Suddenly, the Silent Ones appeared before her, their dark figures looming over her, their faces hidden in shadow. Look at what you have created, Sulima, the tall leader whispered, his voice echoing in her mind. This is the world you have chosen, the price of your ambition. Sulima tried to turn away, to escape their gaze, but she was frozen, trapped by the weight of her own guilt and fear. She realized then that she was bound to them, that they held her soul as surely as they held her loyalty. She woke with a start, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The dream had felt too real, as though it were a vision of the future, a warning of the darkness that awaited her if she continued down this path. But even as she sat in the darkness, trembling with fear, she knew there was no turning back. She was trapped, bound by her own choices, by the promises she had made. Haunted by her nightmares, Sulima made a desperate decision. She would go to the Silent Ones and beg for release, plead for her freedom, even if it meant losing everything she had gained. She waited until midnight, then made her way to the alley where she had first met them. She stood there, her heart racing, calling out their names, hoping that they would hear her. And then, slowly, they appeared, their dark figures emerging from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with a cold, otherworldly light. What is it you seek, Sulima? The tall leader asked, his voice filled with a mocking edge. Please, she whispered, her voice shaking. I don't want this anymore. I want to be free. I'll give back everything you gave me. Just let me go. The Silent Ones exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Then, the leader stepped forward, his face inches from hers. There is no freedom for you, Sulima, he said softly, his voice a whisper of cold dread. You are bound. Sulima's heart sank as the Silent One's words echoed through her mind. There is no freedom for you, Sulima. You are bound. She felt a chill settle over her, a suffocating weight that seemed to seep into her very bones. Her dreams of escaping this nightmare crumbled before her eyes, leaving her more desperate than ever. The leader of the Silent Ones tilted his head, observing her with a chilling, almost pitying gaze. Did you truly believe that you could walk away from a pact sealed in desire and sacrifice? Power and freedom come at a cost, Sulima. There is no turning back. Sulima's mind raced, grasping at any possible solution. She had once thought herself clever, resourceful, but now she was nothing more than a pawn in a game she didn't understand. She had taken what the Silent Ones offered, blind to the chains she was binding herself with. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Is there no way to undo what I've done? The Silent Ones exchanged a dark, knowing look. The leader leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. There is only one way to break the pact, Sulima, but it is not a path you would wish to walk. Sulima's hands trembled as she searched his shadowed face, trying to grasp his meaning. What must I do? The leader smiled, a cold, unsettling smile that made her blood run cold. Sacrifice yourself to the darkness, willingly and completely. Only by giving yourself over can you release the souls we have claimed through you. Salima felt a sickening dread settle in her stomach. Sacrifice herself? That would mean losing everything. Her life, her soul, her very being. She would disappear, consumed by the Silent One's insatiable darkness, erased from existence. But as she looked around at the dimmed lights of Zango, the lifeless faces of its people, she felt the weight of her own responsibility crushing down on her. She had brought this curse upon her city, upon her neighbors, her friends. And now, she was the only one who could stop it. The following days were a blur of fear, doubt, and regret. Salima wandered the streets of Zango, watching the people she had known all her life suffer under the curse she had brought upon them. She saw families mourning loved ones who had fallen ill, merchants struggling as their businesses faded, children losing the spark of life that once brightened their eyes. Everywhere she looked, she was reminded of her choices, of the darkness she had unleashed. As she walked past Baba Sul's home, she felt an intense urge to speak with him, to seek his wisdom one last time. She knew she couldn't reveal the full truth, but perhaps he could offer her some guidance, some way to find the strength to do what had to be done. She knocked on his door, and after a moment, the old man opened it, his face lined with concern as he saw her troubled expression. "Salima," he said softly, ushering her inside. "You look haunted, my child. Tell me, what troubles you so deeply?" Salima hesitated, her heart pounding as she searched for the words. "Baba Sul, if someone made a terrible mistake, a choice that hurt others, and they wanted to make it right, how could they do it?" The old man studied her for a long moment, his gaze filled with kindness and understanding. To correct a wrong, one must be willing to face the consequences of their actions, no matter the cost. True redemption comes not from words, but from sacrifice. His words hit her like a blow, and she felt a tear slip down her cheek as she realized what she had to do. She had tried to escape, to hold on to the life she had gained, but it was clear now that the only way to free Zango from the curse was to make the ultimate sacrifice. That night, Salima prepared herself for what she knew would be her last day in Zango. She took one final walk through the city, saying silent goodbyes to the people and places she had known all her life. She visited the market, the bustling heart of the city that had once been her home, and the small house where she had spent her childhood. As she walked, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She had spent so long chasing wealth and power, blinded by her desire to escape poverty, that she had forgotten the simple beauty of the life she had once led. Now, as she prepared to give it all up, she felt a bittersweet sense of clarity, a connection to the people and the city she had once taken for granted. In the quiet of the night, she returned to her small, lavishly furnished apartment, where all her ill-gotten wealth lay. She ran her fingers over the golden lamps, the silk curtains, the fine fabrics she had once treasured. But now, they felt empty, hollow, a reminder of the cost of her ambition. As dawn approached, she took one final look at the life she was leaving behind, then set out for the alley where she would meet the Silent Ones, her heart steady with resolve. The Silent Ones were waiting for her, their dark figures looming in the shadows, silent and unyielding. The leader stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a cold satisfaction as he saw the determination in her gaze. "You have made your choice, Salima," he said softly, his voice filled with an unsettling calm. "Are you prepared to give yourself over, to sacrifice all that you are?" Salima nodded, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. "I am ready. If this is the only way to save Zango, then I will do it." The leader nodded, raising his hand in a silent command. The other Silent Ones closed in around her, their dark forms pressing in, blocking out the light until all she could see was darkness. As they began their ritual, Salima felt a cold, consuming energy surround her, pulling her deeper into the shadows. Her body grew heavy, her vision dimming, and she felt herself slipping away, as though she were being dissolved into the very darkness she had unleashed. But just as she was about to be consumed, a strange, faint light appeared in the distance, a flicker of warmth amidst the suffocating darkness. She reached out, drawn to the light, feeling an inexplicable pull, as though something, or someone, was calling her back. In that final moment, as she teetered on the edge of oblivion, she heard a voice, soft and familiar, whispering her name. Sulima. And then, everything went black.